Yeah. Well, and I'll close with this because I think this is a very important to make. So one of the things that drew me to the Catholic Church was history, obviously. But what I mean specifically in this case is the amount of chaos and sin and corruption that the church had persevered through, and yet the doctrines were remaining essentially and fundamentally the same. I know people say, well, we don't have time for that right now. Um, I stand by that thesis, and I would be I'm working all the time on proving it. And so essentially and fundamentally the same. And so why does this matter? Because I did not come to the Catholic Church because I thought it was this platonic paradise on earth. It played zero role in my conversion. In fact, it was quite the opposite. It was, I knew there'd been chaos. I mean, the Western Schism, there were three guys claiming to be Pope at one point. All the crises in the first millennium. There's arguably some very grave things going on right now. I knew that there had been many crises it had gone through, and yet it had persevered. When the dust settled, the church in the first century with the apostles was you had to be under an apostle and communion with Peter. When the dust settled in every forthcoming century, you had to be under a successor of the apostles in communion with the successor of Peter. It's that simple. And you know what? That comes straight from Israel, where when the dust settled, you had to be in one of the tribes of Israel that was in communion with Judah, because that was the chief tribe. So when Jesus is choosing 12 apostles, that's not accidental. And then there's Paul, which is very interesting. Won't get into it too much right now, but Ephraim, the tribe from Joseph splits into two. So there actually is kind of like a 13. So when Paul says he's untimely born, that's kind of what I think he's referring to, because part of that tribe, I think, went with the 10 northern tribes, and part of it went with Judah when they split. I think that's what it was. And so it's very interesting. So Israel's the typology. Now, when the 10 northern tribes separated from Judah, they invented a new religion. The very first thing that Jeroboam did was create a new temple and create a new priesthood. I've actually been to the very site where he did that. He chose Bethel, house of God, where Jacob had his dream. And so the outlines of that temple are still there. You can see it. So it's the very first thing he did, because God said the one true temple is in Jerusalem, and everybody in the people of Israel need to offer worship there. It's also very interesting that what precipitated it was tyrannical behavior by King Rehoboam. So bad leadership. It's like, yeah, that's happened before. so anyway, but all that to say is, I think this is very important because the fathers are full of a very deep theology of how the church is the one true church, the pure virginal bride of Christ that will always preach true doctrine, and yet also still has evil within it on its earthly pilgrimage. It's fantastic. Among the things that they talk about, Noah's Ark is the type of the church, which is from Peter. In Noah's Ark, you've got clean and unclean animals, according to the later Torah. They talk about the wheat and the tares in the one field of the Lord. There's the 5 prepared virgins and the 5 unprepared virgins. There's the sheep and the goats. Saint Augustine, he does this extraordinarily well. He refers to the wheat and the tares all the time. He says the key is to remain on the one threshing floor of the Lord. What is he talking about? The threshing floor was the piece of land David bought for the temple. He bought this threshing floor, and a threshing floor is where you take grain, you pound it, and you're trying to separate the germ from the tare. I think that's the proper agricultural terminology. So that's what Augustine's referring to. And he says, you must remain on the threshing floor in the one true Catholic Church, because that's the only place anybody can be saved. But just because you're in there doesn't mean you will be saved. There's wheat and tare. The tare will be thrown into the fire. The wheat will go into the barn, heaven. And so the point is I am not Catholic today because because of all these intellectual things translated into me thinking, oh, the Catholic Church will just be wonderful and dandy and have no problems and no correct. It's like, no. In Jesus, he says, to follow me, you must take up your cross. what I've learned from all this, I'd say there's typologies from the Old Testament, all through the New Testament, about this anti-church within the church. And by the way, you and I could be a part of it. If we choose to mortally sin, we become part of the anti-church, by the way. But even if we wanted to define the anti-church a little more narrowly as those who not only are mortal sin, but maybe no longer even hold the faith, but they continue in the church. There's types of this all throughout Scripture. One of my favorite types, I know we're over. I promise I'll shut it up here. I'll wrap it up here. There's one particular example in Ezekiel. I think it's Ezekiel 8. This is just from memory. But Ezekiel, the angel is talking to Ezekiel. He says, "Son of man, come over here." And he takes him to the temple in Judah, Jerusalem. And Judah and the 10 tribes have already split. And he says, "Come over here." And he sees there's a hole in the wall. He says, "Come over and look in the hole." He looks through the hole and he says, "There's all these priests of Israel, the apostate kingdom, in the wall, in the complex, conducting their rites." So he's showing that even within the Jerusalem temple, Judah remained the beneficiary of God's promises, the Davidic monarchy, the Messiah, all that stuff. Even after exile, God maintains its existence, to the point that all forthcoming Israelites were called Jews from Judah. That's what it was from. And it goes back to Genesis 49 with Jacob's word of prophecy over his son Judah, that the scepter will never depart from Judah. So all that to say is you have these types in the Old Testament of, like, even in the Old Testament, he's saying something evil is infiltrating that which God has established is true and which he will maintain, but it doesn't mean that it's a feather bed, you know? And so you have this all through the New Testament as well. I'm not going to go into it right now. All that to say, though, is if we're going to take up our cross and suffer, we need to do that in the same way Jesus did. Well, one of the ways Jesus did that was by suffering from those within his own family. And part of fulfilling the second commandment, loving your neighbor as yourself, is by maintaining unity with your fellow Christians. And Christ didn't put holding the true faith and holding unity with all Christians. He commanded both, which means he must have made a way to keep both, because he's not a tyrannical father or son. But the Trinity is not tyrannical. Whatever God commands, he provides the grace to fulfill. The grace to fulfill that is on the one threshing floor, the Catholic Church. Guess what? We're all being crushed in one form or another in this church. It's not, no, really. It's like we're all being chastened. We're going to have wolves. We're going to have bad popes. We have had bad popes. We're going to have bad bishops. We're going to have bad priests. That doesn't change the fact that it's Israel. Israel didn't stop being Israel. Judah didn't stop being Judah because of bad people within it. Even leaders. There were horrible kings of Judah. Didn't stop being Judah. There were horrible high priests in Judah. Didn't stop being Judah. It's the same with the Catholic Church. And so really the question we need to be posing to our Protestant friends and whatnot is not, we shouldn't present it. I don't think you do this, but we shouldn't present it as join the Catholic Church, everything is resolved here, because that's not true. Sometimes we're in time periods where things aren't resolved. Now, I believe the Catholic Church has all the mechanisms to resolve crises. Absolutely. The real question is, which family should you suffer with? Should you suffer with the 10 tribes, or should you suffer with Judah? Should you suffer with the pagans? No, we want you to suffer with Judah. You need to, this is the family. I come from a divorced family. So, and divorce sucks. And Jesus said, no divorce. So, but when a family stays in the same house, even when they're throwing tantrums or slamming doors, staying together still counts for something. So, for whatever that's worth, I think it's a very important, especially it's a true reflection of Catholic theology throughout the ages. This theology of the wickedness within the true church is all over the fathers, and it's why I'm Catholic, because it made perfect sense of both the need for unchanging truth alongside the reality of human life prior to heaven.